Gila Wilderness, New Mexico. One backpacker notices something wrong. Birdsong has faded, and even the insects seem quieter than they were a few minutes earlier. Wind still moves through the trees, but the canyon around him suddenly feels empty. About 30 feet uphill, a branch snaps inside brush too thick to see through, followed moments later by another movement. Calling toward the slope brings no answer, only more rustling from somewhere above him. Then, two reflective eyes appear over the bank, slightly iridescent in the fading light, and fixed on him from a height that does not make immediate sense. Higher ground could explain their position, and a tree could explain it too, yet some familiar animal should account for everything else. Except, the shape beneath those eyes refuses to become anything he recognizes. Another branch cracks from somewhere closer and farther to his right, ending whatever patience he had left. Instinct finally wins, and he turns back toward camp. Reaching the others, he warns them that a large predator may be nearby, although nothing follows him, and nobody is attacked. Years later, the encounter still bothers him, because glowing eyes alone are not mysterious. Animals do that all the time. His real problem is that the thing carrying those eyes never looked like an animal he knew. Quick interruption. If you enjoy mysteries that actually get investigated, like the video, subscribe, and support the channel. Maybe it was completely ordinary, but if so, why did so many ordinary details seem wrong at once? According to his later account, the incident happened around 2007, during a multi-day trek through the Gila Wilderness. Roughly 10 people had been traveling together for several days, before making camp near a bend in the river. Near dusk, one member of the group walked away alone, which did not seem unusual at first. Experience outdoors had taught him that large wildlife lived in the area, and he was not entering the woods, expecting anything supernatural. Despite that, he went farther from camp than he later thought was sensible, until the voices behind him faded, and daylight weakened. Shapes gradually replaced familiar details, while the normal background sounds seemed to disappear. That silence bothered him, before he ever saw the eyes. Moments afterward, a branch cracked somewhere above him, so he called out, in case another person was nearby. No reply came, while rustling continued inside brush, dense enough to conceal whatever was moving. Backing away slowly, he tried to keep track of the sound, without turning his back on it. Only then did the eyes appear. Approximately 20 feet away, two reflections seemed to hang above the bank, while darkness concealed everything beneath them. Their position created the first problem. Either something unusually large was standing on the slope, or a smaller animal was sitting higher up, perhaps on a branch. Notably, the later account admits that shadows may have distorted what he was seeing, leaving an owl, or a large mammal on uneven ground, as possible explanations. Before he could settle on either answer, another branch broke from a different direction, and seemed closer. At that point, identifying the animal mattered less than getting back to camp. When he arrived, he did not claim that some unknown creature had chased him through the forest. Instead, he warned the others about a possible large predator, and suggested securing their food, which matters because his first explanation was wildlife. Morning apparently brought no discovery, and the surviving account mentions no tracks, hair, blood, or later sighting. None of the other campers left a corroborating statement, describing the same creature. Whatever had been moving in that drainage was gone. Normally, a wilderness scare like this should end there. Someone sees an animal badly in fading light, becomes frightened, returns to camp, and never identifies what frightened him. Had he clearly recognized a cougar, the fear would have had a name. Seeing a bear would probably have turned the whole episode into a story about wandering too far from camp, near dusk. Memory was left with two bright eyes, breaking branches, and a body that never became visible. Missing that body is where the case becomes difficult, but the story itself creates another problem. By 2019, a first-person version of the encounter was already online. 2 years later, a paranormal blog published the account again, beneath a more dramatic headline centered on the iridescent eyes. Later presentation does not automatically mean false presentation, yet it is not the earliest surviving version either. Once a strange account begins moving through paranormal communities, the framing can become almost as important as the event itself. Such a delay matters, because even the earlier online version appeared long after the alleged encounter, leaving almost every important detail dependent on memory. 30 feet was not measured, 20 feet was not measured, and nobody recorded the height of the eyes, slope angle, eye separation, or nearby branch positions. Those numbers are recollections, rather than measurements, which gives them limits, without making them inventions. A frightened person in near darkness is not conducting a survey. He is trying to decide whether whatever is moving nearby could be dangerous. Here, the investigation reaches a hard boundary, because almost everything we know about the animal comes from one person, remembering a few seconds of poor visibility. Available evidence gives us no image to enlarge, recording to replay, track to compare, or second witness account to confirm the shape and height. From this point onward, every explanation has to work with missing information. Fortunately, one strange detail is easier to explain than it first appears. Many animals have a reflective layer behind the retina that sends light back outward and creates what we call eyeshine. Mountain lions and black bears can show yellowish or reddish reflections, while deer and elk may appear paler. Angle, distance, light source, and individual variation can all change the apparent color. So the word iridescent sounds strange, but it does not require a strange animal. Height is harder, because eyes appearing far above a person can suggest something enormous, until the terrain is considered. An animal uphill does not need to be unusually tall to appear high above someone standing below it, especially when darkness removes the visible slope. Elevated ground could hold a bear, a cougar could watch from a steep bank, and an owl could simply be perched above him. Suddenly, the impossible height is not quite so impossible, although solving that problem creates the next one. Why could he not see the body? Low light vision provides a strong answer, since human eyes become better at detecting faint movement as illumination disappears, while losing color and fine detail. Bright reflections can remain obvious, while fur, limbs, brush, and shadow collapse into one dark mass. In other words, the eyes may have been the easiest part of the animal to see. Ironically, the detail that looked most unnatural may be exactly what ordinary wildlife should look like under those conditions. Silence remains more difficult, because the witness remembers the woods becoming quiet before the encounter, and that detail makes the event feel as if the environment noticed danger before he did. Evidence for that impression is weak, however, because no recording exists, nobody documented what had been audible beforehand, and no reliable timeline shows exactly when the sounds stopped. Heightened attention can make background noise fade from awareness, while wildlife may also change behavior when another animal moves through an area. Either possibility is ordinary, and neither identifies what was present. Much later, the witness wondered whether infrasound could explain the intense fear, but that idea becomes much less useful once we ask what was actually measured. Nothing was recorded, no frequency was identified, and no source was documented. Without those things, infrasound remains an idea considered afterward, rather than evidence from the encounter. Remove it, and the sequence becomes much simpler. A hiker walks away from camp near dusk, something moves in thick brush, fear rises, reflective eyes appear on higher ground, darkness hides the body, another sound comes from a different direction, and the hiker leaves. Viewed on its own, that sequence requires no unknown creature. Nevertheless, one question refuses to disappear completely. Why did someone familiar with the outdoors fail to recognize ordinary wildlife? Because experience has limits, and knowing what a cougar or bear looks like does not help much when all you can see are two reflected points with no reliable scale. Ordinary wildlife can become difficult to identify when distance, slope, darkness, brush, and fear remove most of the information the brain normally uses. Together, those limits may explain the encounter, but they also help explain why the story survived. Afterward, as the account reached the internet, other people began filling in the missing body, and unknown creatures entered the discussion. Cryptid explanations followed, growing around an encounter that never actually described a recognizable monster. Importantly, the witness himself remained far more cautious and continued to include ordinary wildlife among the possibilities. Restraint does not prove every remembered detail is accurate, but it makes the original account less sensational than some later interpretations. This is where the investigation changes, because the real question may no longer be only what happened in the canyon. Perhaps we also need to ask what happened to the story after it left the canyon. Across every retelling, there is the same empty space at its center. Two eyes are there, movement is there, fear is there, but the body is not. Naturally, people try to fill that gap, choosing anything from a cougar or bear to something far stranger. But the evidence never improves. Strip away every later label, and the original case becomes surprisingly small. Something appears to have been moving nearby. Reflective eyes were seen, their height was estimated, and the body could not be identified. Everything beyond that is interpretation. Still, that does not mean nothing happened, because the breaking branches suggest a physical presence, rather than a pair of isolated reflections. Of course, branches break in forests every day, so the sounds are not extraordinary by themselves. Taken together, however, the movement, the eyes, and the witness's retreat form a coherent encounter with something nearby. Now, the possibilities can be tested without needing a monster. Cougars fit the habitat, concealment, eyeshine, and possibility of watching from elevated ground. Black bears also fit the region and can use steep terrain or climb. Deer and elk remain possible, because poor light can make familiar animals appear strangely proportioned. All solve the height problem almost immediately. Each explanation has weaknesses, and none can be confirmed. The important distinction is between an unidentified animal and an unknown animal. Most likely, the witness encountered ordinary wildlife under unusually bad viewing conditions. Eyeshine exposed the animal before its body became visible. Uneven terrain distorted the apparent height. Darkness removed shape and scale, and fear made uncertainty feel dangerous. Over the years, memory preserved the details that never received an answer, while later retellings preserved the mystery, even better than they preserved the evidence. Put together, the explanation requires very little that is unusual, and accounts for almost everything. Almost, because probability can tell us what probably happened, without telling us which animal was there. Several candidates remain plausible: a cougar, a bear, an owl, or other wildlife suited to the area. Retrospective analysis cannot recreate those missing seconds of visual information. Eventually, that leaves us back where the story began. 20 feet away, two reflective eyes appeared where they seemed too high to belong, while no recognizable body emerged beneath them. Closer by, another branch cracked, and the witness ran. We can explain the glow, the apparent height, and why darkness may have erased the body. Yet the animal itself cannot be recovered. Its identity remains the one missing piece. One possibility is that the witness already guessed correctly years ago, with the answer standing on four legs, or sitting quietly on a branch. Any trace of whatever was there disappeared before anyone could identify it. Ultimately, that is why the Gila encounter survives, not because the evidence proves there was a monster, but because, for a few seconds in the dark, there was enough evidence to know something was there, and not enough to know what. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation.